Dad announced my wedding fund was gone like he was reading a weather report. He slid the check to my sister, saying she deserved a real wedding. I did not cry. I just looked at my fiancé. He stood up, checked his phone, and killed the mood with one question. Do you people want to know what I actually do for a living? My sister stopped smiling, but the theft did not start here. It started with a grandmother my family treated like a spare part. My name is Olivia Green, and I had spent 32 years learning how to make myself small enough to fit into the cracks of my family's life. But that night at the Oarsman in Kendall Harbor, I finally ran out of space. The restaurant was one of those places my father, Gordon, loved to choose. It was overpriced, dimly lit, and smelled faintly of old money and cedar polish. It was the kind of establishment where the waiters wore white gloves and looked at you with a polite disdain if you ordered the wrong wine. Outside, the Oregon rain was coming down in sheets, hammering against the dark windows. But inside, the air was still and warm and smelled of roasted duck and expensive perfume. I sat across from my parents, my hands folded in my lap, squeezing my fingers together until the knuckles turned white. Beside me sat Evan Cole, my fiancé. He was wearing his gray suit, the one he wore to his office job every day, the one my mother, Elaine, called serviceable. He had polished his shoes. He had shaved. He had come here tonight prepared to ask for a blessing he did not need but knew I wanted. We were here to talk about a wedding. My wedding. For 3 years, I had been engaged to Evan. For 3 years, we had saved, planned, and waited for the right time to tell my parents that we were finally ready to set a date. We wanted something small, maybe 50 people, a ceremony in the local botanical gardens, a reception at a nice bistro. Nothing like the royal coronations my family usually attended. I cleared my throat. The sound seemed too loud in the hush of the dining room. Dad, Mom, I started, trying to keep my voice steady. Evan and I were looking at dates in October. We found this lovely little venue near the coast, and we were hoping to finally use the fund so we can put down the deposit next week. The fund. It was a phrase that had hung over my head since I was 16. The wedding fund. It was not just money, it was a promise. It was the one thing my father had always dangled in front of me. Proof that despite everything, despite the distance and the coldness, he still saw me as a daughter worthy of being given away. He had talked about it at Christmases and graduations. When Olivia gets married, she will have the best, he would say, swirling his scotch. Gordon put down his fork. He did not look at me. He looked at the heavy linen napkin on his lap, smoothing out a non-existent wrinkle. About that, Gordon said. His voice was casual. It was the voice he used when he was canceling a golf appointment or sending back a steak that was slightly overcooked. We need to talk about the logistics. Olivia. Logistics? I asked. A cold prickle of unease started at the base of my neck. Your sister, my mother interrupted. Leaning forward, her eyes were bright, too bright, and she was smiling that tight, brittle smile she wore when she was about to deliver bad news disguised as a favor. Sloane has been through so much lately. You know how hard this year has been for her. I did not know. As far as I knew, Sloane's year had consisted of 2 vacations to Cabo and a promotion at a job she barely showed up for. Okay, I said slowly. What does Sloane have to do with my venue deposit? Sloane, who had been checking her reflection in the back of a spoon, looked up. She beamed. It was a weaponized expression. She looked beautiful. Of course, she always did. She was the golden child, the one who inherited my mother's bone structure and my father's absolute lack of empathy. I'm getting married too, Sloane squealed. The volume was inappropriate for the restaurant, causing a couple at the next table to glance over. Can you believe it? Mark finally asked me last night. I blinked. Mark? The guy you started dating 2 months ago? When you know, Livy, Sloane said, waving a hand. A diamond the size of a skating rink flashed on her finger. Anyway, Daddy and I were talking this morning, and we realized the timing is just perfect. If we book now, we can get the Larkspur Ridge Resort for a June ceremony. I froze. Larkspur Ridge. That was the most expensive venue in the state. The deposit alone was more than my annual salary. I looked at my father. Dad, what is she talking about? Gordon finally looked at me. His expression was flat. There was no guilt there, only a mild annoyance that I was making him explain this. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a cream-colored envelope. For a second, a foolish, desperate second, I thought it was a check for me. He slid it across the table, but not to me. He slid it to Sloane. "We transferred the funds this morning, sweetheart," Gordon said to her. "You should be able to start locking down the vendors tomorrow." The silence that followed was so loud it felt like pressure building in my ears. I looked at the envelope under Sloane's manicured hand. Then I looked at my father. "Transferred the funds?" I repeated. My voice sounded hollow, like it was coming from someone else. "Which funds?" "The wedding fund," Gordon said, picking up his wineglass. He took a sip, savoring it. "Look, Olivia, let us be realistic here. You and Evan are simple people. You like simple things. A backyard barbecue or a city hall ceremony suits you. It fits your lifestyle." "My lifestyle?" I asked. "Sloane," my mother chimed in, reaching over to pat my sister's hand, "needs a real wedding. She has a reputation to uphold. Mark comes from a very prominent family. We cannot have her getting married in some garden shed. She deserves a wedding that reflects her status. She deserves it. She deserves it." The words hung in the air like smoke. "So you gave her my money," I said. It was not a question. "It was never your money, Olivia," Gordon said sharply. "It is family money, and as the head of this family, I decide where it is best invested. Investing in Sloane's wedding as well. It is a networking opportunity. It is a statement. Frankly, giving you $50,000 for a party would be a waste. You would probably just put it in a savings account or spend it on something practical." Sloane ripped open the envelope. She did not even try to hide her glee. She pulled out a deposit receipt. "Oh my God! Daddy? You got the platinum package with the florist?" she gasped, her eyes scanning the paper. "And the orchestra? You are the best." She looked at me, her eyes wide and mock sympathetic. "Livy, do not be mad. Honestly, you would hate a big wedding. You get so anxious in crowds. I am actually doing you a favor. Plus, you can be my maid of honor. I need someone to help coordinate the vendors because I am going to be so busy with fittings." I sat there, feeling the blood drain from my face. It was not the money. It was the money. But it was not just the currency. It was the message. It was the confirmation of everything I had suspected for 30 years. I was the placeholder. I was the background noise. Sloane was the main event. I felt a hand on my knee under the table. It was warm and steady. Evan, I had been so focused on the betrayal that I had forgotten he was there. I turned to look at him. His face was unreadable. He was watching my father with a calm, terrifying intensity. Evan was a quiet man. My family mistook his silence for stupidity, his kindness for weakness. They thought that because he drove a 5-year-old sedan and bought his suits off the rack, he was beneath them. Gordon noticed me looking at Evan and let out a short, derisive snort. "Don't look at him for help, Olivia," Gordon said, gesturing vaguely at Evan with his fork. "If he was half the provider Mark is. You wouldn't need my help to begin with, but then again, we still don't really know what Evan does, do we?" Gordon smiled, a shark-like baring of teeth. He turned his attention to my fiancé. "Remind me again, son," Gordon said, leaning back in his chair, playing the benevolent patriarch. "It is some sort of data entry? Processing? You are always so vague about it. I assume that is because it is not exactly something to write home about. Does it even pay a living wage? Or is Olivia subsidizing your hobbies?" My mother tittered. "Gordon, be nice. Not everyone has your ambition." "I am just saying," Gordon continued, emboldened by the lack of resistance. "If you want to marry my daughter, you should be able to pay for the wedding yourself. A real man takes care of his wife. He doesn't sit there waiting for a handout from his father-in-law." Sloane laughed. It was a cruel, tinkling sound. Maybe he can work security at my wedding. Daddy, save us some money on the staffing. I opened my mouth to scream. I wanted to flip the table. I wanted to throw my wine in Sloane's face and scream until my throat bled. But before I could make a sound, the chair beside me scraped against the floor. Evan stood up. He did not do it aggressively. He moved with a slow, deliberate grace that I had never seen before. He buttoned his suit jacket. He looked down at the table, his expression completely devoid of the polite deference he had worn for 3 years. The atmosphere at the table shifted instantly. It was as if the air pressure had dropped. My father stopped swirling his wine. Sloane's smile faltered. Evan reached into his inner pocket. My father flinched, just slightly, as if he expected a weapon. But Evan only pulled out his phone. He tapped the screen a few times. His movements precise. He did not look at me. He did not look at Sloane. He kept his eyes fixed on my father. "You asked a question, Gordon," Evan said. His voice was different. It was deeper, colder. The stuttering, shy tone he used around my parents was gone. It was replaced by a voice that sounded like steel sliding against stone. "You asked if you wanted to know what I do." Gordon started, but the words died in his throat. Evan turned the phone around and placed it gently in the center of the table, right next to the breadbasket. "Does everyone want to know what I do to earn a living?" Evan asked. He looked around the table, meeting each of their eyes. He looked at my mother, who was clutching her pearls. He looked at Sloane, whose mouth was slightly open. He looked at my father, who was staring at the phone screen. I leaned forward to look. It was not a picture. It was a document, a digital file with a government seal in the corner and a series of watermarks that screamed classified. But what caught my eye was the logo at the top, Caldwell Risk and Recovery, and below that, Evan's name. But it was the job title that made the room go silent. Senior Forensic Auditor, High Value Asset Recovery Division. Sloane's smile vanished completely. She looked from the phone to Evan, and for the first time in her life, she looked unsure. "I don't understand," my mother whispered. "I thought you worked in logistics." "I do," Evan said. He picked up his wine glass, took a sip, and set it down. He did not sit back down. He loomed over them, not physically, but with a sudden, overwhelming authority. "I manage the logistics of finding money that people try very hard to hide. I specialize in forensic accounting for fraud cases involving amounts exceeding $5 million. My father's face went a shade of gray that matched the stormy sky outside. He put his hand over the envelope he had given Sloane, his fingers curling around it protectively. "That is very interesting," Gordon stammered, his bluster evaporating. "But I hardly see what that has to do with—" "It has everything to do with it," Evan cut him off. He swiped the screen on his phone, bringing up a new image. It was a spreadsheet, a complex web of transactions, dates, and account numbers. "Because in my line of work, you learn to notice patterns. You learn that small withdrawals are rarely just small withdrawals. They are test runs." I looked at Evan. His face was hard, his jaw set. This was not the man who let my mother criticize his haircut. This was a predator who had finally decided to stop playing with his food. "Evan," I said, my voice trembling, "what is going on?" He looked down at me then, and his eyes softened for a fraction of a second. "I told you I would handle it. Olivia, I told you I would not let them hurt you anymore." He looked back at my father. Gordon was sweating now. Beads of perspiration were forming on his upper lip despite the air conditioning. "I did a little digging this afternoon," Evan said conversationally. "It is amazing what you can find when you have the right clearance. I noticed some interesting movement in the family accounts. Specifically, the accounts connected to the trust." "That is private business," Gordon snapped, though his voice cracked. "You have no right." "Actually," Evan said, leaning in, placing both hands on the table, "I have every right, because the account in question does not belong to you, Gordon. It does not belong to Elaine, and it certainly does not belong to Sloane." Evan picked up the phone again. He tapped the screen one last time and held it up so my father could see the transaction history clearly. "Before I tell you exactly how much I know about your offshore transfers," Evan said, his voice dropping to a whisper that carried more threat than a scream, "I have one question. Just one." The entire restaurant seemed to disappear. It was just us. Just the four of us, and the truth sitting in the center of the table like a grenade with the pin pulled. Evan looked Gordon dead in the eye. "Who authorized you to withdraw $200,000 from Grandma Eleanor's account? To understand why I sat in that restaurant chair and watched my fiancé destroy my family with a single sentence. You have to understand the house I grew up in. It was a beautiful house. It was a sprawling colonial in a neighborhood where people hired landscapers to trim their hedges into geometric shapes and where the silence on the streets was heavy with judgment. But inside those walls, there was a very specific geography to our lives. If you walked down the main hallway of the Grant residence, you would see the history of our family framed in gold and mahogany. It was a museum dedicated to the brilliance of the Grant bloodline. But if you looked closely, you would realize it was actually a shrine to a single person. There was Sloane winning the Little Miss Sunshine pageant at age 6, grinning with a gap-toothed ferocity that charmed 3 judges. There was Sloane holding a debate trophy in middle school, Sloane in her cheerleading uniform, flying through the air as the flyer. The girl everyone looked up to, Sloane at graduation, valedictorian, glowing under the stadium lights. I lived in that house too. I occupied a bedroom on the 2nd floor. I ate at the dining table. I did my homework in the study, but on the walls, I was a ghost. My achievements were quiet things that did not photograph well. I won the science fair in 7th grade, but my mother forgot to bring the camera because Sloane had a dance recital the same afternoon. I made the dean's list in college every single semester, but the paper certificates were filed away in a drawer somewhere, likely underneath a stack of Sloane's old modeling portfolios. I learned very early on that in the Grant household, love was not a birthright. It was a commission. You earned it through visibility. You earned it by being the thing that made Gordon and Elaine Grant look like successful parents. Success was our religion, but it was a very specific brand of success. It had to be shiny. It had to be loud. It had to be something my father could brag about on the golf course between swings. My life was not shiny. I chose a path that baffled them. While Sloane was chasing internships at high-fashion magazines and dating sons of senators, I was quietly building a career at Bright Cove Initiatives. It was a nonprofit organization focused on urban development and housing stability. It was messy, complicated work. I spent my days analyzing spreadsheets, coordinating with city councils, and trying to find funding for community centers in neighborhoods my parents would never drive through. Even with the doors locked, I was proud of my work. I was good at it. I was 30 years old, a senior project coordinator, and I had built a life that was entirely my own. I paid my own rent. I paid off my own student loans because the college fund my father had promised me mysteriously dried up the year Sloane decided she wanted to study abroad in Italy. I never asked for help. I never asked for money. I thought that if I asked for nothing, I could not be disappointed. But the invisible tax of being the other daughter was always there. I remember a Sunday lunch 2 years ago. I had just closed a massive deal to renovate a block of dilapidated apartments into affordable housing for 50 families. It had taken me 6 months of negotiation. I was exhausted but elated. I sat at the table, waiting for a lull in the conversation to share my news. "I finally got the signature on the Riverton project," I said, smiling at my father. 50 families are going to have homes by Christmas." My father looked up from his roast beef. He nodded, a vague, distracted motion. "That is nice. Olivia, good for the resume." Then my mother turned to Sloane, her eyes lighting up like she had just been plugged into a socket. "Speaking of homes, did you tell your sister about the penthouse Mark is looking at? The one with the view of the bay?" And just like that, my 6 months of work evaporated. The conversation pivoted instantly to Sloane's potential view, Sloane's potential furniture, and how Sloane would look standing on a balcony holding a glass of champagne. My 50 families were gone. I was gone. I stopped trying to compete when I was 12. I realized that you cannot win a game where the rules are rewritten every time you roll the dice. The only person who saw me, who actually looked at me and saw Olivia rather than a failed version of Sloane, was my grandmother, Eleanor Price. Eleanor lived 3 miles away in a small cottage that smelled of lavender and old books. Her house was the Auntie Grant estate. There were no awards on the walls. There were just paintings of landscapes she liked, and shelves overflowing with paperbacks that had cracked spines. She did not care about status. She cared about truth. I used to escape to her house on the weekends. I would ride my bike there, my lungs burning, just to sit in her kitchen and drink tea in a room where I did not have to perform. Eleanor was the one who taught me the most important lesson of my life. She was a sharp woman, sharper than anyone gave her credit for. She had married a man she loved, buried him too young, and managed her own small inheritance with a frugality that drove my mother insane. One afternoon, when I was 16 and crying because my father had missed my piano recital to watch Sloane try out for a play, Eleanor sat me down. She did not hug me. She did not offer empty platitudes. She poured me a cup of strong tea and looked me in the eye. "You are waiting for them to apologize," she said. It was not a question. "I just want them to care," I sobbed. "They care about themselves, Olivia," she said, her voice dry and crisp like autumn leaves. "And they care about the things that reflect themselves. Sloane is a mirror. When they look at her, they see a prettier, younger version of their own vanity. When they look at you, they see a person, and people are messy. People are inconvenient." She reached across the table and tapped my hand. "Do not beg," she told me. "That is the one thing you must never do. Do not beg for attention. Do not beg for love. If you have to ask for it, it is not yours. And if you have to change your shape to fit into their world, you will break your own bones doing it." She taught me to watch. She taught me to listen to what people did, not what they said. "Watch the hands," she would say. "People can lie with their mouths, but their hands tell the truth. Watch who reaches for the check. Watch who holds the door. Watch who clutches their purse when the bill comes." It was Eleanor who first understood Evan. When I started dating Evan, my family was underwhelmed. Evan was not a senator's son. He was not a tech mogul. He was a man who wore flannel shirts on the weekend and drove a Honda Civic that had 150,000 miles on it. He was quiet. He did not dominate conversations. He did not interrupt people to talk about his stock portfolio. To my parents, Evan was background noise. They called him nice in the South. "Bless your heart" is an insult in the Grant family. "He is nice" was a death sentence. It meant he was irrelevant. But I took him to meet Eleanor 3 months into our relationship. We found her in her backyard, struggling with a heavy ceramic planter she was trying to move into the shade. Before I could even say hello, Evan had stepped forward. He did not make a show of it. He did not ask if she needed a strong man. He just walked over, picked up the planter with a calm, easy strength, and asked her where she wanted it. "Over by the hydrangeas, please," Eleanor said. Watching him, Evan placed it down gently, making sure it was level. Then, without being asked, he noticed the garden gate was hanging loose on its top hinge. He pulled a multi-tool from his pocket and tightened the screw. It took him 30 seconds. He walked back to us, wiped his hands on his jeans, and smiled at my grandmother. "Hi, I am Evan. It is nice to meet you, Mrs. Price." Eleanor looked at him for a long time. She looked at his shoes, which were sensible and clean. She looked at his hands, which were rough from work but gentle. She looked at his eyes, which were steady. Later, while Evan was in the kitchen washing our teacups, another thing he did without being asked, and another thing my father would never have done, Eleanor pulled me aside. "Keep him," she whispered. "Mom and Dad think he is boring," I said, rolling my eyes. "Dad asked him if he had any ambition." Eleanor snorted. It was a very unladylike sound. "Your father thinks noise is power," she said. He thinks the man who talks the loudest is the man who wins. He is wrong. This boy, she nodded toward the kitchen, he is not loud, but he is not weak. There is a difference between silence and emptiness. Olivia, your parents are empty. This boy is solid. He is the kind of man who checks the foundation before he paints the house. She squeezed my arm. He sees you. I watched him while you were talking about your work. He was not waiting for his turn to speak. He was listening. That is rare. Eleanor was right. Of course, she was always right. My family continued to misread Evan for 3 years. They saw his generic job title and assumed he was a paper pusher. They saw his refusal to engage in their debates about luxury cars and assumed he could not afford one. They saw his patience as submission. They treated him like a piece of furniture. At Thanksgiving, they would put him at the end of the table near the drafty window. They would interrupt him constantly. Sloane would ask him to take photos of her and her latest boyfriend, treating him like hired help. Evan never complained. He never snapped. He would just look at me, give a tiny, almost imperceptible wink, and do as they asked. "Why do you let them treat you like that?" I asked him once. Furious after my father had spent 20 minutes lecturing Evan on how to invest money he assumed Evan did not have. Evan had just shrugged, his hands on the steering wheel as we drove home. "They show me who they are. Olivia, I am just taking notes. Besides, the only opinion in that room that matters to me is yours. And maybe Eleanor's." He and Eleanor had developed a quiet alliance. He would go over to her house to fix her gutters or program her television remote. They would sit on her porch and talk about things I didn't even know they shared an interest in. History, old movies, the mechanics of forensic puzzles. Evan never told my parents about his real work, and Eleanor never asked him to justify himself. She just knew. "Be careful with that one," Eleanor told me 6 months ago, after my father had made a particularly nasty joke about Evan's suit. "Your father is poking a sleeping bear. He thinks because the bear is sleeping, it has no teeth." I thought about that warning as I sat in the restaurant, watching the blood drain from my father's face. I thought about the years of being invisible. I thought about the framed photos of Sloane and the blank spaces where I should have been. I thought about the way they had dismissed Evan as a nobody, a simpleton, a man unworthy of the Grant legacy. They had spent their lives worshiping the god of appearances. They believed that if something looked perfect, it was perfect. They believed that if you spoke with authority, you were right. They believed that they could edit the narrative of our lives just like they edited their holiday newsletters, cropping out the ugly parts and highlighting the victories. But Eleanor had told me something else, years ago, on a rainy afternoon when I was crying over another broken promise. "In a room full of shouting people," she had said, looking out at the rain, "the truth is usually the quietest thing in the corner. The louder the room, the less truth there is." The dining room at the Oarsman had been very loud tonight. My father's booming voice, my mother's performative laughter, Sloane's squealing delight over stolen money. It had been a symphony of noise designed to drown out the reality of what they were doing. But now, the room was silent. And in that silence, for the first time in 32 years, the truth was finally standing up. It was wearing a gray suit, holding a cell phone, and looking at my father with the cold, hard stare of a man who had finished taking notes and was ready to deliver the grade. The silence that followed Evan's question at the restaurant did not last forever. It ended with the scraping of chairs, the murmuring of embarrassed waiters, and my father storming out with a threat about lawyers that sounded more like a plea for help than a show of force. We left separately. Evan and I went to our quiet apartment, and my family went back to their fortress to regroup. But if I thought that being caught red-handed would make them stop, I underestimated their capacity for denial. For the next 48 hours, my phone vibrated with a relentless, manic energy. It was Sloane. She was not texting me apologies. She was not asking if we could talk. She was broadcasting her victory to the world, one social media story at a time. I lay in bed, the blue light of the screen illuminating the ceiling, watching my sister construct a fantasy in real time. There she was, clinking glasses of mimosa with her 3 best friends at a bridal boutique. The caption read, "Found the one. Thank you, Daddy, for making dreams come true." Next slide, a close-up of a 3-tier cake tasting tray. Vanilla bean or raspberry reduction? Decisions are so hard when everything is perfect. Next slide, a panoramic video of the Larkspur Ridge Resort. Panning over the cliffs and the ocean view. Venue secured. June cannot come fast enough. Grant wedding real wedding. The timestamp on the venue post was from 2 hours ago. I felt a sick, heavy turning in my stomach. Larkspur Ridge required a $20,000 deposit just to hold a date. The dress she was trying on was a designer label that started at $8,000. The florist she tagged in her next post had a minimum spend of $15,000. In less than 2 days, Sloane had spent nearly $50,000. She was spending it fast. She was spending it like she was trying to burn the evidence. If the money was already converted into non-refundable deposits, into tulle and sugar and flowers, then it could not be taken back. It was a scorched earth policy wrapped in white satin. I turned to Evan, who was sitting at the small desk in our bedroom. His laptop open. He was not looking at Instagram. He was looking at bank routing numbers. "She is booking everything," I said, my voice sounding thin in the dark room. "Evan, she is spending money we do not even know if she has. Or rather, money that we know she shouldn't have." Evan did not look up, but his fingers paused on the keyboard. "She is panicking," he said calmly. "Liquidity is dangerous when you are under scrutiny. Assets are safer. She thinks if she turns the cash into a wedding, we cannot touch it. It is a childish way to launder money, but it is effective in the short term." My phone buzzed with an incoming call. It was my father. I stared at the screen. My heart hammered against my ribs. I wanted to ignore it. I wanted to throw the phone out the window. But the old habits, the 30 years of conditioning to answer when Gordon Grant called, were hard to break. I picked up. "Olivia," Gordon said. He did not say hello. His voice was smooth, reasonable. The voice of a man who was used to talking his way out of traffic tickets and zoning violations. "I am glad I caught you. We need to clear the air after that unfortunate misunderstanding at dinner." "Misunderstanding?" I asked. I sat up, clutching the sheet. "You gave my wedding fund to Sloane, and Evan found withdrawals from Grandma's account. That is not a misunderstanding. Dad?" "Now, listen," Gordon said, his tone dropping an octave, becoming confidential. "You need to stop listening to that boy. I know you think you know him, but you do not know how the world works. Evan is unstable. He is throwing around wild accusations because he is insecure about his own standing. He is trying to isolate you from your family." I almost laughed. "He is a forensic auditor. Dad, he showed you the spreadsheet. He showed me a piece of paper he probably typed up in 5 minutes. Gordon countered quickly. "Look, Olivia, let us be practical. You and Evan, you are not ready for a large financial responsibility, a big wedding. It would be a burden on you. You would be stressed. You would hate the attention. Sloane, on the other hand, she thrives in it. We are just putting the resources where they make the most sense." "So you admit you took it," I said. "I moved family assets to cover a family priority," Gordon said. "And frankly, I am disappointed that you are being so petty about it. I called to give you some advice, father to daughter. Stop digging. Tell your fiancé to drop this nonsense about your grandmother's accounts. If he keeps poking around, he is going to cause a lot of unnecessary trouble for Eleanor. You do not want to stress her out at her age, do you?" The threat was veiled, but it was there. "If you pursue this, you are the one hurting Grandma." "Do not bring her into this," I said. "She is already in it, Olivia," Gordon said coldly, "because she trusts us. She knows we handle her affairs for her own good. Do not go confusing her with complicated questions she cannot understand. You will only upset her." He hung up before I could respond. I sat there, the silence ringing in my ears. Then my phone dinged again, a text from my mother. "Livy, please don't be difficult. Sloane is under so much pressure to make this day perfect. She needs a real wedding to solidify her future. You have always been the simple one. You are happy with less. Let your sister have this. We can talk about a nice dinner party for you later. The simple one, it was not a compliment. It was a classification. I was the Honda Civic. Sloane was the Ferrari. You do not put premium gas in a Civic. Get dressed, Evan said. I looked up. He had closed his laptop and was standing by the door, holding his car keys. Where are we going? I asked. To see Eleanor, Evan said. Your father just played his hand. He is banking on the fact that we will be too afraid of upsetting your grandmother to ask her the truth. He is banking on her not knowing what is happening. He said she trusts them, I whispered. That, Evan said, opening the door, is exactly what thieves rely on. We drove to Eleanor's house in silence. The rain had stopped, leaving the street slick and black under the streetlights. When we pulled into her driveway, the small cottage looked peaceful. The porch light was on, a warm yellow beacon against the dark trees. Eleanor was surprised to see us. It was 8 o'clock on a Tuesday, a time when she was usually settling in with her tea and her mystery novels. She opened the door, wrapping her cardigan tighter around her frail shoulders. Olivia? Evan? She asked, peering through her glasses. Is everything all right? You did not call. We just wanted to check on you. Grandma, I said, forcing a smile. I kissed her cheek. Her skin felt like paper, dry and delicate. We were in the neighborhood. We went into the kitchen. The house was meticulously clean, as always, but there was a stack of mail on the counter that looked untouched. Usually. Eleanor opened her mail the second it arrived. She bustled around, putting the kettle on, but her movements were slower than usual. There was a hesitancy in her hands. I saw Sloane's pictures online, Eleanor said, her back to us as she reached for mugs. She seems very busy. A June wedding. That is very soon. It is, I said. I sat at the table, watching her. Grandma, did you know she booked Larkspur Ridge? Eleanor paused. The mug in her hand rattled slightly against the saucer. Larkspur? Oh my, that is very expensive, isn't it? Gordon told me they found a good deal. There are no deals at Larkspur, Grandma, Evan said gently. Eleanor turned around. She looked tired. There were shadows under her eyes that makeup could not hide. She brought the tea to the table and sat down. Avoiding our eyes, she picked up her phone, which was lying on the placemat. She tapped the screen, frowned, and tapped it again. Is something wrong with your phone? I asked. Oh, it is just this banking application, she said, waving a hand dismissively. It keeps logging me out, and the password I have written down does not seem to work anymore. I must be typing it wrong. My fingers are not as nimble as they used to be. I looked at Evan. His face was impassive, but his eyes were sharp. May I look? Evan asked. Eleanor hesitated, then slid the phone over. I do not want to bother you with it. Evan, Elaine said she would fix it for me next week. She said the bank updated their system, and it is very complicated now. Evan picked up the phone. He did not try to log in. He just looked at the login screen. Grandma, he said softly, when was the last time you checked your balance? Oh, a few months ago, I suppose, she said, looking at the tablecloth. Your mother, Elaine, she told me not to worry about the details. She said at my age, I should not be stressing over numbers. She said she and Gordon were helping manage things, to make sure bills get paid on time. Helping manage. The phrase hit me like a physical blow. It was the same phrase Gordon had used on the phone. We handle her affairs. Did you ask them to help? I asked. Well, not exactly, Eleanor admitted. She traced the pattern of a flower on the tablecloth with her finger. But after I was in the hospital last year, you remember, with the pneumonia, I was so groggy. I could barely keep my eyes open. Elaine brought in so many papers, insurance forms, hospital releases. She said it was all standard. Evan placed the phone down very gently on the table. "Did you sign anything else, Eleanor?" Evan asked. "Anything that was not for the hospital?" Eleanor looked up, her eyes wide and frightened. "She said it was just to help with the copays, to let them talk to the insurance company if I was too sick. What did she call it? A power of something?" "Power of attorney?" Evan supplied. "Yes," Eleanor said, looking relieved. "That is it, just so they could handle the medical bills. Why? Is something wrong?" I felt the blood drain from my face. A power of attorney. If it was a general, durable power of attorney, it gave them access to everything: her bank accounts, her investments, her retirement funds. They could write checks, transfer assets, and empty her life savings without her ever having to lift a pen. "Grandma," I started, my voice shaking. "Did you read it?" "I did not have my glasses," she whispered. "And Elaine was in such a rush. She said the notary was waiting in the hallway and they had to get back to work. I trusted her. Olivia, she is my daughter." The silence in the kitchen was heavy and suffocating. The kettle began to whistle, a high, shrieking sound that made us all jump. Eleanor got up to turn it off. Her hands were shaking. She knew. Somewhere, deep down, she knew that something was wrong. She knew why her password did not work. She knew why the mail was piling up. But admitting it meant admitting that her own child was stripping her bare. My phone buzzed again. Another text. I looked down. It was Sloan again. "Stop being a drama queen and telling Dad lies. You are just jealous because Mark can provide for me and Evan is a nobody. Do not ruin my moment. I deserve a wedding that people will remember." I stared at the words. I deserve. They truly believed it. They believed that because they were the loud ones, the shiny ones, they were entitled to consume everything around them to keep their light burning. They would burn through my savings. They would burn through Eleanor's security. They would cannibalize their own family to feed their ego. Evan reached across the table and took my hand. His grip was firm. He looked at Eleanor, who was standing by the stove, her back to us, her shoulders hunched in a posture of defeat. Then he looked at me. "Olivia," he said. His voice was low, so Eleanor could not hear, but it carried the weight of a judge's gavel. "We are not dealing with bad borrowing habits. We are dealing with predation." He tapped the screen of Eleanor's locked phone. "If they have power of attorney, they didn't just steal your wedding fund," Evan said. "That was just the loose change they found on the counter. The real money is in the accounts they locked her out of." He leaned in closer to me, his eyes dark and furious. "And here's the thing about people like your father," Evan said. "If they have been used to taking from you because you are too nice to stop them, they will have no problem taking from her because she is too old to stop them." I looked at my grandmother, standing alone in her kitchen, afraid to check her own bank balance. Then I looked at the text from Sloan. "Don't be selfish." "You are right," I said to Evan. Picking up my purse, I stood up. The sadness was gone. It had been replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. "I am done being nice." I walked over to Eleanor and gently took the teapot from her shaking hands. "Grandma," I said, "we are going to make a phone call. Not to Mom, not to Dad. We are calling the bank, and then we are going to call a lawyer." The invitation to the venue walkthrough weekend was issued on a Thursday, 3 days after the disastrous dinner at the Oarsman. It came from my mother, Elaine, in a group text that included everyone except Evan. "We are taking Grandma to Larkspur Ridge so she can see where Sloan will have her big day." The message read, "It is important for her to feel included. We want her to be part of the magic." I read the text and felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. They did not want Eleanor there for the magic. They wanted her there for the optics. They needed the doting grandmother in the background of Sloane's Instagram stories to soften the image of a 26-year-old spending $50,000 on a party while her sister got nothing. They needed a prop. "We are going," I told Evan. "They did not invite me," Evan noted, looking up from his tablet where he was tracking the movement of funds from a shell company. I do not care, I said. I am not letting them take her to that place alone. If they have power of attorney, who knows what they will try to get her to sign between the appetizer and the main course. So we went. We picked Eleanor up on Saturday morning. She was waiting on her porch, sitting on a small bench, looking like a child waiting for a school bus that might not come. She had dressed with a heartbreaking amount of care. She wore her best Sunday suit, a soft lilac wool that had seen better days but was pressed to perfection. Her silver hair was curled, and in her lap, she held a small, worn velvet box. She clutched that box with both hands. "What is that, Grandma?" I asked, as I helped her into the back seat of Evan's car. "Oh, just something I wanted to show Sloane," she said, her eyes bright with a fragile hope. "Since she is getting married, I thought it might be the right time." She did not elaborate, and I did not push. But the way she smoothed the velvet with her thumb told me that whatever was inside was worth more to her than the entire resort we were driving to. Larkspur Ridge Resort was designed to make you feel poor. That was its architectural purpose. You drove through massive iron gates and up a winding road lined with imported cypress trees until you reached the main lodge, a monstrosity of timber and stone that looked like it had been airlifted from the Swiss Alps and dropped onto the Oregon coast. The air smelled of sea salt and money. We met my parents and Sloane in the lobby. The lobby was the size of a cathedral, with a fireplace large enough to roast a whole ox and chandeliers made of antlers that probably cost more than my college tuition. Gordon was wearing a cashmere sweater tied around his shoulders, the uniform of the leisure class he was desperately trying to mimic, when he saw Evan and me walking in behind Eleanor. His smile flickered like a dying light bulb. "Olivia," he said, his voice tight, "we did not expect you, or him. We wanted to help Grandma with her bags," Evan said comfortably. He did not look intimidated. He looked like he was inspecting a crime scene. Sloane did not even look at us. She was spinning in a circle, holding her phone up, filming the ceiling. "Guys, the lighting in here is insane," she said to her virtual audience. "Can you imagine the entrance photos?" Elaine descended on Eleanor, but she did not hug her. She adjusted Eleanor's collar, picking a piece of lint off the lilac wool with a sharp, critical movement. "Mother, you look tired," Elaine said. "I hope you're up for the walking tour. It is quite extensive." "I am fine, dear," Eleanor said, smiling that polite, automatic smile she used to deflect conflict. "I am just happy to be here." "Well, let us get checked in," Gordon announced, clapping his hands. "I need a drink before we meet the planner." We moved to the reception desk as a group. It felt like a procession. The receptionist was a beautiful, terrifyingly poised young woman with perfect teeth and eyes that scanned our clothes to determine our net worth in 3 seconds flat. "Welcome to Larkspur Ridge," she purred. "Checking in?" "Grant," my father said, leaning an elbow on the high marble counter. "Gordon Grant, 3 suites," the woman typed on her keyboard. Her nails clicked against the keys like hail on a windowpane. "Ah, yes, Mr. Grant. I see the reservation here. 1 king suite for you and Mrs. Grant, 1 bridal suite for Miss Sloane Grant." She stopped typing. She looked at the screen, then at us, then back at the screen. "And the 3rd room?" Gordon asked. He was tapping his credit card on the marble. A nervous tick. "I am sorry, Mr. Grant," the receptionist said, her professional smile not wavering. "I only have 2 rooms reserved under your name." The silence that fell over the group was instant and absolute. I stepped forward. "There should be a room for Eleanor Price," I said. "My grandmother," the receptionist typed again. "Price? Price? "Yes," I said. She shook her head. "I am sorry. I have no reservation for an Eleanor Price, and the resort is fully booked for the weekend due to the corporate retreat in the West Wing." I turned to my father. Gordon was suddenly very interested in the floral arrangement on the counter. "Dad?" I said. "It must be a system error," Gordon muttered, his face flushing a blotchy red. "I told that girl on the phone 3 rooms. These third-party booking sites are incompetent, always messing up the details. I booked directly through the concierge. Sir, the receptionist said pleasantly, cutting off his escape route with surgical precision. The notes here say 2 rooms, confirmed 3 times via email. Sloane looked up from her phone, bored. Can't she just sleep on the pull-out in your living room? Mom, the suites are huge. It is fine. Elaine let out a sigh, the kind of sound one makes when a piece of luggage is too heavy. She turned to Eleanor. She did not look apologetic. She looked annoyed. Well, Mother, Elaine said, it looks like there was a mix-up. You know how technology is these days. You do not mind sharing with us, do you? The sofa in our parlor is Italian leather. It is very comfortable. I watched my grandmother. She was standing in the middle of this lobby, surrounded by strangers carrying Louis Vuitton bags. She was 82 years old. She had brought her best suit. She had brought a gift in a velvet box. She had come here believing that her family wanted her presence, and in the span of 30 seconds, they had reduced her to an afterthought, a couch surfer, a burden that had to be tucked away in the corner of a room she was not important enough to occupy. The humiliation did not crash down like a wave. It settled like dust, coating everything in a layer of gray shame. Eleanor stood very still. Her hands tightened on the strap of her purse. I saw the tremor. It started in her fingers and traveled up her wrist. It was not a tremor of age. It was the shaking of a person who is trying very, very hard to keep their dignity from shattering on a marble floor. It is quite all right, Eleanor said. Her voice was steady, but it was thin, like glass about to break. I am sure it was just a mistake. I do not mind the sofa. I do not want to be a bother. She smiled. That smile broke my heart. It was the smile of a woman who had spent a lifetime apologizing for taking up space. She is not sleeping on a sofa, I said. My voice was loud. People turned to look. I did not care. She is 82 years old. You brought her 2 hours from home to a luxury resort, and you did not even book her a bed? Lower your voice, Olivia, my mother hissed, grabbing my arm. You are making a scene. I am making a scene? I laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. You people are unbelievable. You are spending $50,000 on flowers, and you couldn't spend $400 to give your mother a room? It is a glitch, Gordon snapped. Though he refused to look at the receptionist, we will sort it out later. Let us just get the keys and go upstairs. Evan moved then. He stepped past me, past my mother, past Gordon. He walked right up to the counter. He placed his hands flat on the marble. He did not look at the receptionist. He looked at the computer screen. Then he turned his head slowly to look at my father. Excuse me, Evan said to the receptionist. His voice was polite, terrifyingly calm. Since there seems to be confusion about the booking, could you clarify something for me? Certainly, sir, the woman said, looking relieved to be talking to someone who wasn't shouting. The 2 rooms that are booked, Evan said, enunciating every word. Which credit card is on file for the incidentals and the deposit? Gordon froze. His hand stopped tapping the counter. The receptionist looked at the screen. It is a Visa ending in 4492, under the name. She paused, squinting at the screen. Oh, it is under the name Eleanor Price. The air left the lobby. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. I looked at Gordon. I looked at Sloane. They hadn't just forgotten to book Eleanor a room. They had used Eleanor's card to book their rooms. They were standing in a lobby, surrounded by luxury, preparing to sleep in king-sized beds paid for by the woman they were forcing to sleep on a couch. Sloane suddenly found something very interesting on her shoes. Elaine turned pale, her hand flying to her throat. Gordon opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked like a fish gasping on a dock. Evan did not say another word to them. He turned to the receptionist. Cancel them, Evan said. Excuse me? The receptionist asked. I am not the card holder, Evan said, turning to gesture at Eleanor, who looked like she had been turned to stone. But she is, and she is revoking authorization, right now. You cannot do that, Sloane shrieked, her facade finally cracking. "We have a meeting with the planner in 20 minutes." "I don't care," I said. I walked over to Eleanor and put my arm around her. She felt tiny. She felt cold. "We are leaving. Now." "Mother, tell her to stop," Elaine pleaded. Reaching for Eleanor, "Tell her not to ruin this." Eleanor flinched. She actually flinched away from her own daughter's hand. She looked at Elaine, then she looked at Gordon. Her eyes were dry, but they were filled with a profound, bottomless sadness. "I think," Eleanor said softly, "that I would like to go home, Olivia." We walked out. We left them standing at the desk, arguing with the receptionist who was explaining that without the card holder present and consenting, the reservation was void. We left Sloane crying about her aesthetic. We left Gordon yelling about lawsuits. We walked out into the gray, misty afternoon and got into Evan's car. I sat in the back with Eleanor. I held her hand. It was ice cold. The velvet box was still in her lap. Her fingers curled around it so tightly, her knuckles were white. We drove for 10 minutes in silence. The only sound was the rhythmic swoosh of the windshield wipers and the hum of the tires on the wet asphalt. I was furious. I was shaking with rage. I wanted to turn the car around and burn the resort to the ground. I wanted to scream until my voice gave out. But then Eleanor spoke. She did not look at me. She looked out the window at the passing trees, blurring into a green smear against the gray sky. "They did not forget me, Olivia," she said. Her voice was barely a whisper, but in the quiet car, it sounded like a thunderclap. "I know, Grandma," I said, tears finally stinging my eyes. "They are selfish. They are—" "No," she interrupted me gently. She turned from the window to look at me. Her face was not angry, it was resigned. It was the face of someone who has finally accepted a diagnosis they had been ignoring for years. "They did not forget," she repeated. "You forget your keys. You forget an umbrella." She looked down at the velvet box in her lap, the gift she had brought for a granddaughter who viewed her as a credit card limit rather than a person. "They chose," Eleanor said. "They looked at the plan for their happiness, and they decided that I was not necessary for it. They chose to make me unnecessary." She closed her eyes and leaned her head back against the seat. "And that," she whispered, "is a very different thing from being forgotten." The drive back to Kendall Harbor was quiet, but it was not the silence of peace. It was the silence of a bomb squad trying to decide which wire to cut. When we finally walked into Eleanor's kitchen, the cottage felt different. It no longer felt like a sanctuary. It felt like a crime scene that had not yet been taped off. Eleanor sat at her small oak table, still wearing her lilac coat. She looked smaller than she had that morning. The humiliation at the resort check-in desk had stripped away layers of her defenses, leaving her raw and exposed. She placed the velvet box on the table, her fingers trembling slightly as she unlatched the clasp. I sat down opposite her. Evan remained standing, leaning against the counter, his eyes moving over the room as if he were scanning for listening devices. "I brought this today because I wanted to feel useful," Eleanor said softly. She opened the lid. Inside lay a piece of fabric. It was old, the white lace yellowed by time, folded intricately around a small, black-and-white photograph. It was not a diamond necklace or a heavy gold bracelet. It was a veil, a fingertip-length veil made of Chantilly lace, delicate as a spider web. "My mother made this," Eleanor said, touching the fabric with a reverence she had never shown for the expensive gifts my parents occasionally threw her way. "She made it by hand in 1942. I wore it. Your mother wore it, though she complained it was too old-fashioned." She picked up the photograph. It was her wedding photo. She looked radiant, young, and hopeful, standing beside a man I only knew from stories. "I thought," Eleanor continued, her voice hitching, "that I might give it to Sloane. I thought if I gave her something real, something with history, she might understand that a wedding is not just a party. I thought maybe she would let me put it on her, just for a moment." She looked up at me, and her eyes were swimming with tears. But when we were standing in that lobby, she whispered. I realized she would have laughed at it. She would have called it a rag. She pushed the box across the table toward me. It belongs to you. Olivia, it has always belonged to you. You are the only one who understands that things have value because of the hands that held them, not the price tag attached to them. I reached out and touched the lace. It was rough against my fingertips. I felt a lump rise in my throat, hard and painful. My grandmother had packed this box with hope, carried it into a pit of vipers, and been rejected before she could even open it. But the sentimental moment was cut short by the reality of what had happened at the desk. Grandma, I said, keeping my hand on the box, but turning my focus to her face. We need to talk about the credit card, the one they used for the booking. Eleanor flinched. She pulled her hand back as if the table were hot. I told you, she murmured, looking away. I signed some papers, last year, when I had the pneumonia. Tell me exactly what happened, Evan said. He did not sound like a grandson-in-law. He sounded like the investigator he was. His voice was low, devoid of judgment, but demanding of the truth. Eleanor took a breath. I was very sick. You remember, I was on so much medication. Elaine came to the hospital room. She was wearing her work clothes, holding a coffee cup, checking her watch. She said the hospital billing department was making a fuss. She said they needed authorization to process the insurance claims, or I would be stuck with a $50,000 bill. And she gave you a document? Evan asked. She gave me a stack, Eleanor said. She flipped to the back pages. She said, just sign here, Mother, and we can go home. She held the pen for me. My hand was shaking so bad I could barely write my name. Did she give you a copy? I asked. Eleanor shook her head. She said she would file it in the safe at her house, for safekeeping. I looked at Evan. His jaw was set so hard, a muscle was jumping in his cheek. This was not just theft. This was entrapment. They had waited until she was vulnerable, drugged on medication, and terrified of debt to strip her of her autonomy. I need to see your phone, Eleanor, Evan said. She unlocked it and handed it to him. Evan plugged it into his laptop, which he had brought in from the car. I moved to stand next to him, watching the screen. What are you looking for? I asked. Configuration, Evan said. If they are draining the accounts, they have to stop the bank from alerting her. Banks are paranoid these days. They send texts for everything. He clicked through a few menus. Then he stopped. Here, he said, pointing to the screen. I leaned in. It was her email settings, specifically, the filter rules. Rule 1. If sender contains Bank of America, Vanguard, or Fidelity, move to trash. Mark as read. I felt sick. They set up a filter to auto-delete her bank statements. It gets worse, Evan said. He pulled up the contact information for the bank app on her phone. Look at the two-factor authentication number. I looked. The number ended in 88. Eleanor's number ended in 45. That is Dad's work cell, I whispered. The one he keeps in his briefcase. Exactly, Evan said. So every time a transaction is flagged, the bank sends a code. Gordon gets the code. Gordon approves the transaction. Eleanor never hears a beep. Can you get into the account? I asked. I can bypass the app if I use her recovery email, assuming they didn't change that too. Evan said. His fingers flew across the keyboard. Okay, I am in. The screen refreshed, displaying the transaction history for her primary checking account. I expected to see the big numbers. I expected to see the deposit for the resort, or the $20,000 for the venue, but that is not what I saw. What I saw was a list that went on for pages. It was a drip feed, a slow, methodical bleeding. January 4th. Grocery market, $300. January 10th. Gas station, $80. January 12th. Cash. Withdrawal, $400. January 15th. Utility payment, $250. These look like normal expenses, I said, confused. Look at the location of the gas station, Evan said. It is in North Ridley, Near Sloane's apartment. And the utility payment, he added, highlighting a line. Grandma's electric bill is on auto pay to the city. This payment is to a private solar energy provider. Sloane had solar panels installed on her rental last summer to be eco-friendly. I scrolled back. Month after month, year after year, small amounts, 300 here, 500 there. Amounts that would not trigger a fraud alert because they looked like lifestyle spending. But then I looked at the total for the year to date. $22,000, I read aloud. In 6 months, and that was just the checking account. Evan clicked over to the savings account, the one Eleanor had told me she was keeping for her long-term care. In case she needed a nurse, it was almost empty. There was one massive transfer from 3 months ago. Transfer to GG Holdings, LLC, $45,000. GG Holdings, I said. Gordon Grant. My wedding fund, I realized. The room spinning slightly. Dad told me he had saved $50,000 for my wedding. He didn't save it. He took it from her. I looked at Eleanor. She was still sitting at the table, her hands folded over the velvet box. She was not looking at us. She was staring at the wall, her face pale. Grandma? I said gently. She looked at me. Her eyes were full of a terrible, dawning realization. I thought I was just spending too much on groceries, she whispered. I thought I was losing my mind. I cut back on my medication because I thought I couldn't afford the refill. I started eating toast for dinner because the balance was always lower than I remembered. I fell to my knees beside her chair. I grabbed her hands. They were ice cold. You cut back on your heart medication? I asked, my voice trembling with rage. I didn't want to ask for help, she said. Gordon said money was tight. He said the economy was bad. I didn't want to be a burden. I buried my face in her lap. I cried. I cried not for the money, but for the image of my grandmother, sitting alone in this kitchen, eating toast and splitting pills, terrified that she was going senile. While my sister was tasting raspberry reduction cakes and my father was drinking scotch paid for with her lifeblood, it was not just theft, it was abuse. It was a systematic gaslighting designed to make an old woman doubt her own sanity so they could rob her blind. I stood up. I wiped my face. The sadness was gone, replaced by a cold, hard resolve that felt like iron in my spine. We are going to the police, I said. Eleanor grabbed my arm. Her grip was surprisingly strong. No, she said. Her voice was high, panicked. No police. Olivia, I cannot. They are my family. I cannot have the neighbors seeing police cars in the driveway. I cannot have people saying I raised a criminal. The shame would kill me. Grandma, they are stealing from you, I argued. They are endangering your health. I know, she said, tears spilling over. I know. But please, I am old. I do not have the strength for a war. I just want it to stop. Just make it stop. But don't put them in jail. Please. I looked at Evan. He was watching Eleanor with deep sympathy. He understood. He knew that for her generation, private disgrace was worse than public theft. She would rather lose the money than lose the illusion that she had raised a good family, but I could not let them get away with it. Grandma, I said, kneeling down again so I was eye level with her, I will not call the police today, but I need you to listen to me. You spent your whole life making yourself small so they could feel big. You spent your whole life protecting them. I took a breath. You deserve to be protected, I said. For once in your life, you are going to be the one we fight for. I stood up and turned to Evan. What do we do? I asked. If we cannot call the cops, how do we stop them? Evan walked over to the table. He picked up his phone. He did not look at the bank data anymore. He looked at me, and then at Eleanor. We do not need the police to stop them, Evan said. We just need the truth. And in my world, the truth looks like an audit. He placed his phone on the table, face down, like he was playing a trump card. I can open a formal forensic investigation through my firm, Evan said. We can frame it as a recovery operation for the errors on the account. We can subpoena the records, trace the shell companies, and document every single penny. He looked at Eleanor. But I need you to understand something. Eleanor, Evan said, his voice grave. Once I open this file, I cannot close it. It becomes a matter of record. If I find fraud, and I will find fraud, I am legally obligated to report it to the Adult Protective Services and the IRS. I can keep the police sirens away from your driveway, but I cannot stop the government from asking why Gordon Grant is spending your Social Security checks. It is the nuclear option, I said. It is the only option, Evan corrected, because if we just ask them to stop, they will wait a month and start again. They are addicts. They are addicted to your money. Eleanor looked at the veil in the box. She looked at the photo of her younger self, the woman who had started this family with hope and love. Then she looked at the empty medication bottle on her counter. She closed her eyes. She took a deep, shuddering breath. When she opened them, the fear was still there, but beneath it, there was a spark of anger. Do it, she said. The office of Mara Whitfield was not designed to make you feel comfortable. It was designed to make you feel efficient. Located in a glass-walled building in downtown Portland, her workspace was a study in aggressive minimalism. There were no family photos, no plants, and absolutely no candy bowls. The only things on her desk were a legal pad, a fountain pen, and the terrifyingly thick file Evan had compiled over the last 48 hours. Mara Whitfield herself was a woman made of sharp angles and sharper intellect. She specialized in elder law and financial exploitation, and rumor had it she could smell a breach of fiduciary duty from the parking lot. She did not offer my grandmother a tissue when we sat down. She offered her a pen. The first step is mechanical, Mara said, her voice crisp and devoid of the pity that usually made Eleanor crumble. We are not here to discuss feelings. We are here to close the gates. Mrs. Price, you are currently hemorrhaging agency. We are going to stop the bleeding. I sat on one side of Eleanor, Evan on the other. Eleanor looked small in the leather chair, her hands clutching her purse, but her jaw was set. The drive to the lawyer's office had been silent, a solemn procession toward a war we hadn't wanted to start. We are filing an immediate revocation of the power of attorney, Mara explained, sliding a document across the mahogany desk. This kills their legal right to sign your name. We are also filing a demand for accounting. This forces your son and daughter-in-law to explain every penny they have spent since the date the document was signed. If they cannot produce a receipt that benefits you directly, it is considered theft. Eleanor picked up the pen. Her hand shook, just a little. They will be angry, Eleanor whispered. They will be panicked, Mara corrected. Anger is a secondary emotion. Panic is what happens when the ATM stops dispensing cash. Sign here. Eleanor signed. The scratch of the pen against the paper sounded like a lock clicking shut. Next, Mara said, turning to Evan. Asset protection. We need to freeze the accounts before the revocation notice hits their mailbox. If they get wind of this, they will try to drain what is left. It is called a smash and grab. We have already contacted the fraud department at the primary bank, Evan said. But we need to secure the digital access. They have the passwords, the security questions, and the two-factor authentication routed to Gordon's phone. Olivia, Mara said, looking at me. You are the new designated agent. Take your grandmother's phone. I took the device. For the next hour, the room became a command center. We didn't talk about weddings or family dinners. We talked in codes and protocols. We were performing a digital exorcism. I created a new email address for Eleanor, one that my mother did not know existed. I changed the passwords to random strings of characters that not even I could memorize without writing them down. We called the bank, identifying ourselves with the new legal documents Mara scanned and emailed on the spot. Security question, the bank representative asked over the speakerphone. Mother's maiden name? Change it, I said. Change it to Bluebird. Favorite high school teacher? Change it to whiskey. I looked at Eleanor. She gave me a weak smile. I hate whiskey, she said. That is the point, Evan said. Gordon knows you hate whiskey. He would never guess it. The most satisfying moment came when we changed the phone number for the one-time passcodes. For the last 2 years, every time Eleanor's money moved, my father's pocket had buzzed. Now, when they tried to log in, my phone would buzz. I was the gatekeeper now. Once the digital perimeter was secure, we moved to the timeline. Evan projected his spreadsheet onto the wall monitor. It was a masterpiece of forensic accounting. He had color-coded the transactions: green for legitimate expenses, red for suspicious withdrawals. The screen was bleeding red. The power of attorney was signed on February 14th of last year, Evan said, pointing to the date. Valentine's Day? A nice touch. That was when I was in the hospital, Eleanor confirmed. The first withdrawal happened 2 days later, Evan said. $5,000? Cash? Gordon told me he needed to borrow some money, Eleanor said suddenly. She was looking at the red line on the screen. He came to the hospital bed. He was crying. He said Sloan was in trouble with a credit card company, and they were threatening to sue her. He said it would destroy her credit score, and she would never be able to get a job. He swore he would pay me back the next month. Did he? Mara asked. No, Eleanor said softly. He never mentioned it again, and when I asked, he said I was confused, and that he had already paid it back into my investment account where I couldn't see it. Gaslighting, Mara noted, writing something on her legal pad. Classic. He creates a debt, claims he paid it, and relies on your lack of access to the statements to prove him wrong. Evan scrolled down. It escalates here. May of this year, the withdrawals get larger, 10,000, 15,000. This aligns with when Sloan got engaged. The wedding, I said. They started funding the wedding before she was even officially engaged. Look at this one, Evan said, zooming in on a transaction from 3 weeks ago. $12,000 paid to Celestial Event Planning, LLC. That must be the wedding planner, I said. That is what I thought, Evan said. So I ran a check on the business entity. Celestial Event Planning, LLC, was incorporated 6 weeks ago. That is not unusual, Mara shrugged. Wedding vendors pop up all the time. True, Evan said. But look at the registered address for the business. He pulled up a Google Maps image. It wasn't a floral shop. It wasn't a bridal studio. It was a sleek, glass office building in the financial district. I squinted at the screen. That building that is the Metro Tower. Suite 405, Evan read. My blood ran cold. That is Mark's office, I said. Sloan's fiancé. He is an architect. His firm is in that suite. The room went silent. So, Mara said, leaning back in her chair, a look of grim satisfaction on her face. They are not just paying vendors. They are funneling money directly to the fiancé. They are laundering it, Evan said. They pay a fake wedding planning company. The company is owned by Mark or an associate, and the money goes right back into their pockets, or it goes toward a down payment on a house they couldn't afford otherwise. It means Mark is in on it, I said, feeling sick. Sloan is in on it. It is not just Mom and Dad. It is a conspiracy to defraud, Mara corrected. And now we have the paper trail to prove it. She closed the file. The sound was loud in the quiet room. We have enough to bury them, Mara said. The question is, how do you want to do it? We can send a cease and desist letter today. We can have the sheriff serve them with a restraining order, or we can file a civil suit. I looked at Eleanor. She looked exhausted, but her eyes were clear. She was done being the victim. If we send a letter, Evan said slowly, they will destroy evidence. They will shred papers. They will delete emails. They will come up with stories to explain the Celestial Event Planning payments. We need to catch them when they cannot lie, I said. We need to catch them when they are so arrogant they think they are untouchable. I looked at the calendar on the wall. Next Saturday. The bridal shower, I said. Eleanor looked at me. The party? It is at the Seawick Event Loft, I said. Sloan has invited everyone, her friends, Mark's family, the local society people. Dad is going to give a speech about family values. They are going to be parading their wealth, your wealth, in front of the whole town. It is a public forum, Mara said, tapping her pen against her chin. High risk, but high reward. If you confront them there, the social pressure prevents them from causing a scene or physically intimidating you. They have to maintain the facade. And the vendors will be there, Evan added. The planner, the caterer. If we show up with proof that the checks are going to bounce because the accounts are frozen, the wedding stops instantly. It is cruel, Eleanor said. Stealing your heart medication money is cruel. Grandma, I said firmly. Stopping a party is just justice. Eleanor took a deep breath. She looked at the screen one last time, at the red lines that represented her life's work being siphoned off to buy champagne for people who didn't care if she lived or died. Okay, she said. We do it. Mara nodded. She began gathering the papers. I will prepare the final audit report. I will have the revocation orders notarized and ready to serve. I will come with you. A lawyer in the room changes the temperature. We stood up to leave. I felt a strange sense of calm. The fear was gone. The hesitation was gone. We had the map. We had the weapons. We had the high ground. As we reached the door, Mara cleared her throat. One last thing. Ms. Green, she said. I turned back. Mara was holding a specific document from the bottom of the stack. It was an old trust deed, yellowed with age. I was reviewing the original source of the funds, Mara said. You mentioned your father gave your wedding fund to your sister. He claimed it was family money he controlled. Yes, I said. He always said he made good investments in the 90s. Mara offered a rare, thin smile. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of a shark recognizing blood in the water. I have looked at Gordon Grant's tax returns for the last 20 years, which were attached to your grandmother's files, Mara said. Your father has not made a net profit on an investment since 1998. He has been insolvent for a decade. I stared at her. What? The money he saved for your wedding? Mara said. The money he is spending on Sloan? It never came from his earnings. He didn't build a nest egg for you. Olivia, she held up the trust deed. This is a trust established by your grandfather in 1990. It was designated for the education and advancement of his grandchildren. Gordon was named as the trustee, meaning he was supposed to manage it, not spend it, but the principal, the actual cash? Mara looked me dead in the eye. That money was never his to give, and it was never his to take away. He has been playing the benevolent patriarch with your grandfather's ghost. I felt the floor tilt, all those years of holding the wedding fund over my head, all those years of making me dance for it, making me beg for it. It wasn't his money, it was mine. It had been mine before I could even read. So when he gave it to Sloan, I whispered, he was robbing one beneficiary to pay the other, Mara said, and taking a management fee for himself along the way. She placed the document back on the desk. Bring comfortable shoes to the bridal shower. Olivia, Mara said, we are not just going to stop a wedding, we are going to rewrite your family history. The Seawick Event Loft was designed to look like a repurposed industrial warehouse. The kind that had been scrubbed of all its actual labor history and repainted in shades of dove gray and champagne gold. It was the sort of place where the exposed brick was sealed with a gloss finish, and the lighting was carefully calibrated to make everyone look 10 years younger and 3 tax brackets richer. When we walked in, the air conditioning hit us first, followed immediately by the overwhelming scent of 2,000 peonies. Sloan had wanted a garden-in-the-sky theme, and looking around at the suspended floral arrangements and the crystal glassware catching the afternoon sun, I calculated that the flowers alone cost more than the car I drove. I walked in flanked by Evan and Eleanor. My grandmother was wearing the same lilac suit she had worn to the resort, a deliberate choice. She held her head high, her hand resting lightly on my arm. Not for support, but for solidarity. We were not guests. We were not family. We were a demolition crew dressed in Sunday best. The room was packed. There were at least 80 women there, a sea of pastel cocktail dresses and perfectly highlighted hair. These were Sloane's people, the friends from her sorority, the wives of my father's golf buddies, the inner circle of Kendall Harbor's social elite. They were sipping mimosas and laughing that distinct, tinkling laugh that sounds like ice hitting glass. "Smile," Evan whispered to me, his voice low and steady. "We are just here to wish the bride well." I forced a smile onto my face. It felt tight, like a mask that didn't quite fit. We moved through the crowd. I saw heads turn. I saw the whispers start. People knew there was tension. My father had undoubtedly spun a story about how difficult I was being about the wedding, but they smiled at us anyway because politeness was the currency of this realm. We found a table near the back, close to the gift station where a mountain of silver-wrapped boxes was growing steadily, at the front of the room. My father was holding a microphone. He loved a microphone. He stood next to Sloane, who was sitting on a velvet throne, literally, a high-backed velvet chair rented for the occasion, looking like a princess who had just conquered a kingdom. "Can I just say," Gordon boomed, his voice echoing off the high ceilings, "how incredibly proud I am to be standing here today. You know, when Elaine and I started planning this wedding with Sloane, we said, let us not hold back, because when you have a daughter as special as Sloane, you do not count the cost, you celebrate the love." Applause rippled through the room. Sloane dabbed at a dry eye with a lace handkerchief. "We are just a simple family," Gordon continued, chuckling at his own lie. "But we believe in tradition. We believe in giving our children the foundation they deserve, and seeing all of you here, supporting Sloane and Mark well, it makes every penny worth it." He raised his glass. "To Sloane, and to the most spectacular wedding this town has ever seen." "To Sloane," the room chorused. I felt Eleanor stiffen beside me. She was watching her son. She was watching the man who had sat by her hospital bed and lied about a debt to steal her savings, now standing there playing the benevolent patriarch. Her grip on her purse tightened until her knuckles were white. My mother, Elaine, spotted us. She froze for a second, a tray of hors d'oeuvres hovering in her hand. Before composing herself and rushing over, her smile was frantic. "Mother," Elaine hissed, leaning down to kiss Eleanor's cheek without actually touching her skin. "I didn't think you were coming. You said you were feeling unwell." "I am feeling much better, Elaine," Eleanor said. Her voice was cool, clearer than I had heard it in years. "Well, that is wonderful," Elaine said, her eyes darting around to see if anyone was watching. "Why don't you come sit up front for a few photos? Just for a minute. Then we can find you a quiet spot in the lounge so you don't get overwhelmed by the noise. You know how you get with crowds." She reached for Eleanor's arm, trying to pull her up like a prop she needed to rearrange. Eleanor did not move. She did not pull away. She simply looked at Elaine's hand on her sleeve until Elaine, unsettled by the lack of compliance, let go. "I am fine right here," Eleanor said. "I want to see everything. I want to see exactly what my contribution has paid for." Elaine blinked, confused by the tone but too distracted to parse the meaning. "Right. Well, just try to look happy, okay? The photographer is circling." She bustled away. I stood up. "I am going to get a water," I told Evan. I walked toward the bar. But I didn't stop there. I drifted toward the planner's station. It was a table set up near the entrance, manned by a harried-looking woman with a headset who was arranging seating charts. On the table, next to a stack of menus, was an open laptop and a clipboard. I paused, pretending to admire a flower arrangement. I looked down at the clipboard. It was an invoice for the catering. The total at the bottom was $14,000, but it was the stamp across the top that caught my eye. Deposit received via wire transfer. Source, GG, Holdings/E, Price Trust. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. They weren't even hiding it anymore. They were using a trust account with her name on it, laundering it through Gordon's shell company, and slapping it onto catering bills. I looked up and saw the doors to the loft open. It wasn't a guest. Mara Whitfield walked in. She did not look like she belonged at a bridal shower. She was wearing a charcoal gray suit that was tailored within an inch of its life. Her hair was pulled back in a severe bun. She carried a leather briefcase, not a clutch. Behind her walked a young male assistant, carrying a portable file box. The room did not go silent immediately. The chatter continued. The music played. But as Mara walked through the crowd, people instinctively parted. She moved with a purpose that cut through the social fluff like a knife through tulle. She walked straight to our table. She nodded to Eleanor. Then she turned and walked to the front of the room, stopping directly in front of the velvet throne where Sloane was opening gifts. Gordon was standing there, handing Sloane a box. He looked up, annoyed at the interruption. "Excuse me," Gordon said, stepping forward. "This is a private event. Are you at the venue?" Mara Whitfield stopped. She adjusted her glasses. She looked at Gordon, then at the room of 80 women who had suddenly stopped talking to watch the interaction. "Mr. Gordon Grant?" Mara asked. Her voice was not loud, but it projected perfectly. It was a courtroom voice. "Yes," Gordon said, puffed up with indignation. "Who are you?" "My name is Mara Whitfield," she said. "I am the attorney representing Mrs. Eleanor Price." The name hung in the air. Gordon's face went from annoyed to ash gray in the span of a heartbeat. He looked at Eleanor in the back of the room. He looked at me. "This is neither the time nor the place," Gordon hissed, trying to herd Mara away from the microphone. "We can discuss whatever legal business you think you have on Monday." "I am afraid we cannot," Mara said pleasantly. She did not move. "We are here to clarify a few transactions regarding the funding of this event. Specifically, the $45,000 transferred from my client's medical savings account to the entity paying for this venue." A gasp rippled through the room. It was audible. Sloane stood up. Her face was flushed. "What is she talking about? Daddy, get her out of here." Gordon grabbed my arm. I hadn't realized he had moved toward me, and yanked me toward the corner of the room, away from the guests but still visible. His grip was painful. "What are you doing?" he whispered, his voice shaking with a mix of rage and terror. "You brought a lawyer here? To your sister's shower? Are you insane?" "I didn't bring a lawyer to a shower. Dad," I said, pulling my arm out of his grasp. I smoothed my dress. "I brought a lawyer to a crime scene." "You are going to ruin this family," Gordon spat. "You are jealous. That is what this is. You cannot stand that Sloane is happy, so you want to burn it all down. If you do not tell that woman to leave right now, I will cut you off. I will write you out of the will. You will never see a dime." I looked at him, really looked at him. I saw the sweat on his forehead. I saw the fear in his eyes, and I realized that the man I had spent my life trying to please was not a giant. He was just a thief in a cashmere sweater. "I am not trying to destroy the family, Dad," I said calmly. "I am just cleaning the trap you set. And as for the will, there is nothing left to write me out of. You spent it all. He raised a hand, as if to strike me, then remembered where we were. "What the hell are you doing?" Sloane screamed. Abandoning her throne and storming over, she switched to English, her voice shrill. "You are such a bitter, jealous cow. You couldn't handle that I got the real wedding, so you had to invent some story to humiliate me?" She turned to the guests, throwing her arms wide. "She is lying," Sloane shouted. "My sister has always been jealous of me. She is trying to ruin my day because she has a cheap ring and a boring life." The guests looked uncomfortable. They looked from Sloane to me. Unsure of who to believe, the social pressure was thick, suffocating. It was designed to make me fold. It was designed to make me apologize and retreat to save face. But Mara Whitfield did not care about face. Mara walked over to the gift table with a swift, deliberate motion. She swept a pile of gift bags aside to clear a space. The sound of paper tearing was sharp. She signaled to her assistant. The assistant opened the file box and pulled out a stack of documents. They were enlarged. They were mounted on foam boards. Mara placed the first board on the table. propping it up against a vase of hydrangeas. "This," Mara announced, her voice cutting through Sloane's hysterics, "is a bank statement from February of this year. It shows a withdrawal of $10,000 from Eleanor Price's account." She placed another board next to it. "And this," she continued, "is a deposit slip from the same day into the account of Sloane Grant Wedding Fund. You will notice the routing numbers match." She placed a third board. "And this is a copy of the check written to Seawick Event Loft for the deposit on this room, signed by Gordon Grant, drawn on funds transferred from the account of a woman who was told she could not afford her heart medication." The silence in the room was absolute. It was a vacuum. Sloane looked at the boards. She looked at the guests. She saw her friends, the bridesmaids, the society wives, staring at the numbers. "It was a gift," Sloane stammered, her voice losing its power. "Grandma gave it to us." "Mrs. Price?" Mara asked, turning to the back of the room. "Did you authorize a gift of $150,000 to your granddaughter?" Everyone turned to look at Eleanor. Eleanor remained seated. She did not stand up. She did not shout. She just shook her head, slowly and sadly. "No," Eleanor said. Her voice was soft, but in the silence, it carried to every corner. "I did not. I was told that money was for my hospital bills." The humiliation that Sloane had tried to inflict on me, the shame Gordon had tried to use to control Eleanor, it all reversed direction instantly. It boomeranged back and hit them with the force of a freight train. Elaine collapsed into a chair, burying her face in her hands. Gordon stood frozen, his mouth opening and closing. Sloane looked at Mark's mother, who was sitting in the front row. Mark's mother was standing up, her face a mask of horror, clutching her purse. "I think," Mark's mother said, her voice icy, "that we have seen enough." "Wait," Sloane cried, reaching out. "It is a misunderstanding. Olivia is manipulating the numbers." It was chaos, a polite, restrained, high society chaos, where people began grabbing their purses and looking for the exits, desperate to disassociate themselves from the scandal. Then, Evan stepped forward. He walked to the center of the room, standing between the guests and my family. He did not look angry. He looked like he was at work. He looked like he was solving a puzzle that bored him. He raised a hand, and surprisingly, the room quieted down. People stopped moving toward the doors. They wanted to hear what the man in the gray suit had to say. "Before you all leave," Evan said. His voice was calm, authoritative. "And before anyone calls this a family drama or a misunderstanding," he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. He held it up. "I want to make sure you understand what you are actually witnessing," Evan said, "because what my fiancé and her grandmother just showed you isn't an argument about a party." He looked at Gordon, who was now leaning against the wall, looking like he might vomit. "Drama is when you argue about the flavor of the cake," Evan said. "What we have here is a federal crime." The silence in the Seawick Event Loft was heavy, the kind of silence that usually precedes a verdict. Evan stood in the center of the room, surrounded by the wreckage of my sister's social life, the torn gift wrap, the exposed foam boards, the shocked faces of the elite. He did not look like a man who was enjoying himself. He looked like a man who was filing paperwork. He did not unclip a badge. He did not shout for security. He simply walked over to where my father was leaning against the wall, trying to look like a victim of a misunderstanding rather than a perpetrator of a crime. Evan tapped his phone screen once, unlocking it, and turned it around so Gordon could see. "Read the top line." "Gordon," Evan said. His voice was conversational, low enough that the guests in the back had to lean forward, but clear enough that it cut through the hum of the air conditioning. My father squinted at the screen. He adjusted his silk tie, a nervous tic I had watched for 30 years. "Caldwell Risk and Recovery," Gordon read aloud, his tone dismissive. "I do not know them. What is this? Some kind of insurance adjustment firm? You are an insurance clerk?" "Keep reading," Evan said. Senior Asset Recovery Specialist. Gordon read. He scoffed. A desperate, breathless sound. So, you sit in a cubicle and call people about their late car payments. Is that supposed to impress me? Is that supposed to give you the right to audit my family? Evan took the phone back and slid it into his pocket. He looked at my father with an expression that was almost pitying. My office is not a call center. Gordon, Evan said. My office is where people come when they stop trusting their business partners, or their spouses, or, in this case, their parents. He took a step closer. I do not chase late car payments. Evan continued, his voice dropping to a register that made the hair on my arms stand up. I trace high-value assets that have been diverted through shell companies, offshore trusts, and fraudulent vendor schemes. I am the guy they hire when they want to find the money before they call the FBI. Sloane, who had been trying to rally her bridesmaids into a defensive phalanx, froze, her face, already pale, turned the color of the white hydrangeas behind her. You are lying, she whispered. You are just a boring logistics guy. You drive a Honda. I drive a Honda because I understand the value of a depreciating asset, Evan said without looking at her. And I noticed your structuring patterns in about 30 seconds. Structuring? Sloane asked, her voice trembling. Structuring, Evan repeated. Also known as smurfing. It is when you break down a large cash deposit or withdrawal into smaller amounts to avoid triggering the federal reporting threshold of $10,000. He gestured to the foam board Mara had set up. February 20th, $9,500. February 21st, $9,000. February 22nd, $9,800. You thought if you kept it under $10,000, the bank would not flag it. You thought you were being clever. Sloane looked like she was going to be sick. But here's the thing about algorithms. Sloane, Evan said, they are designed to catch clever people. 3 withdrawals just under the limit in 3 days? That flags you faster than if you had just taken the $30,000 all at once. It shows intent to conceal. Okay, that is enough, Elaine shrieked. She pushed her way through the crowd, her hands fluttering wildly. This is a private family matter. We can explain everything. Gordon, tell them to stop. We need to go somewhere private. There is a back office. We can talk there. She reached for Mara's arm, trying to guide her away from the guests. Mara didn't budge. She didn't even blink. No, Mara said. We are not going to a back office. But the guests, Elaine pleaded, gesturing to the room full of women who were now recording the interaction on their phones. We cannot discuss finances in front of strangers. You spent Eleanor's money in public, Mara said, her voice sharp as a razor. You spent it on this venue. You spent it on that catering spread. You spent it on the dress your daughter is wearing. Since the money is in the room, the conversation stays in the room. Evan stepped back in, taking control of the narrative before my father could interrupt. Let us talk about the method, Evan said. He looked at the crowd, addressing them like a jury. Because everyone here should know how easy it is. How do you steal $200,000 from an 82-year-old woman without her noticing? He held up a finger. Step 1. You isolate the target. You convince her she is sick. You convince her she is confused. He held up a second finger. Step 2. You intercept the alerts. We found the filter on Eleanor's email account. Move to trash. We found the 2-factor authentication number changed to Gordon's work cell. Gordon flinched. He looked at the exit, but the path was blocked by a wall of stunned socialites. And step 3, Evan said, holding up a third finger. You create a loop. You take the money out. You move it to a holding company, and then you pay it out to a vendor that looks legitimate. He walked over to the table where the wedding planner's invoice lay. He picked it up. Celestial Event Planning, Evan read. Sounds lovely. Very bridal. He looked at Sloane. Who runs Celestial Event Planning? Sloane? Sloane stared at him. She was breathing fast, her chest heaving. I don't know. My planner recommended them. They handle the logistics. Strange, Evan said. Because I ran a check on the LLC registration this morning. He turned to the foam board Mara had not yet revealed. He flipped it over. It was a document from the Secretary of State's business registry. The registered agent for celestial event planning is not a wedding planner, Evan said. It is a man named Thomas Sterling. A gasp went through the front row. I recognized the name immediately. Thomas Sterling, I said aloud. That is Mark's father. Sloane's knees gave out. She grabbed the back of her velvet throne to keep from falling. Mark's father is a corporate attorney, Evan explained to the room. And it seems he set up a nice little shell company to receive deposits. Deposits that came directly from Eleanor Price's medical savings. Evan looked at my father. You weren't just paying for a wedding, Gordon. You were paying a dowry. You were funneling money to Mark's family to buy Sloane a seat at their table. That is not true, Gordon shouted. But his voice cracked. It was for services rendered. Consulting. Design fees. Design fees? Evan raised an eyebrow. $45,000 for design fees paid to a law firm? He turned to Sloane. Did Mark know? Evan asked. Did your fiancé know that his father was laundering your grandmother's stolen money to pay for his own wedding? Sloane looked at the board. She looked at the guests. She looked at Mark's mother, who was now clutching her pearls so hard the strand looked ready to snap. The pressure broke her. But Dad said it was okay, Sloane screamed. She spun around to face Gordon, tears streaming down her face, ruining her professional makeup. You said you handled it. You told me the money was from the trust. You said Mark's dad agreed to help structure the payments so we could get the tax write-off. The confession hung in the air like smoke. Sloane, Gordon roared, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. Shut up. No, she shrieked. You are not going to pin this on me. You told me Grandma wouldn't mind. You said she was going to die soon anyway, and she didn't need it. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the kind of silence that happens when a human being reveals something so monstrous that the brain struggles to process it. She was going to die soon anyway. I looked at Eleanor. She was sitting very still. Her face was unreadable, but I saw a single tear track down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. She let it fall, a silent testament to the cruelty of her own blood. Oh my God, someone in the crowd whispered. Gordon looked around the room. He saw the disgust on the faces of his peers. He saw the judgment in the eyes of the women he had tried to impress. He realized, in that moment, that no amount of spin was going to fix this. The mask had not just slipped. It had been ripped off, taking the skin with it. He looked for an escape. He looked at the door. He looked at Elaine, who was sobbing into a napkin. I was trying to protect the assets, Gordon stammered, his voice weak. Mother is not capable of managing her own finances. I was preserving the estate for the future, for the girls. By spending it on a party? Evan asked coldly. By buying a $20,000 venue deposit for a resort she wasn't even allowed to sleep at? Evan turned to Mara. I think we are done here. Mara stepped forward. She placed a heavy folder on the table, right next to the wedding cake that had cost $800. Mr. Grant, Mara said. Mistress Grant, Miss Sloane Grant. She opened the folder. This is a settlement agreement, Mara said. It outlines a full repayment plan of the $212,000 you have misappropriated over the last 18 months. It includes the immediate liquidation of assets to cover the debt, the cost of a forensic audit to ensure we found everything, and the permanent revocation of all legal authority over Eleanor Price. She placed a pen on top of the document. You have two choices, Mara continued. Option A, you sign this today, you agree to every term, you pay back every cent, and we walk away. Gordon stared at the paper. And option B? Mara smiled. It was a terrifying smile. Option B, she said, is that I walk out of here and drive directly to the district attorney's office. I hand them this file. I hand them the witness statements from everyone in this room, and we file charges for elder abuse, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit theft. She checked her watch. "The DA's office closes in an hour," Mara said. "I would decide quickly." Evan stepped back to stand beside me. He took my hand. His palm was warm. "Did I miss anything?" he whispered to me. I looked at my father, who was trembling as he reached for the pen. I looked at Sloane, who was sitting on the floor in her designer dress, weeping not for her grandmother, but for the life she had just lost. "No," I whispered back. "I think you got everything." Gordon picked up the pen. He didn't look at us. He didn't look at Eleanor. He signed. It was the most expensive autograph he would ever give. 3 days after the public execution of the Grant family reputation at the Seawick event loft, we gathered in the conference room of Mara Whitfield's law firm. This time, there were no hors d'oeuvres, no flower arrangements, and definitely no applause. There was only a long, polished mahogany table that separated my life from theirs. On one side sat my parents and Sloane. They looked like refugees from a war they had started but failed to win. Gordon was wearing a suit that looked like he had slept in it. Elaine had abandoned her usual impeccable makeup for a pair of large sunglasses she refused to take off. Sloane sat between them, arms crossed, staring at the wall with a petulant, terrified fury. On the other side sat Eleanor, Evan, and me. Mara Whitfield sat at the head of the table, presiding over the wreckage like a coroner conducting an autopsy on a still-breathing patient. "We are here to formalize the restitution agreement," Mara began, her voice devoid of warmth. "But before we finalize the repayment schedule, there are a few outstanding line items in the forensic audit that require explanation. We need to understand the intent behind the withdrawals to determine if we are filing this as simple theft or aggravated fraud." Gordon cleared his throat. It was a wet, ragged sound. "I have told you," he said, his voice raspy. "It was not theft. It was liquidity management. I was moving resources to address an immediate crisis." "A crisis?" Evan asked, not looking up from his file. "You mean the wedding?" "It wasn't just the wedding," Gordon snapped, then slumped back in his chair. "Sloane was in trouble, real trouble." We all looked at Sloane. She shrank into her chair, pulling her cardigan tighter around herself. "Tell them," Gordon said wearily. Sloane bit her lip. "I had some expenses, from college, and living in the city. It is expensive to maintain a network. Olivia, you wouldn't understand." "She had 4 credit cards maxed out," Gordon interrupted, rubbing his temples. $70,000 in high-interest debt. Discover was threatening to garnish her wages. If she actually had wages to garnish. Amex was calling the house 5 times a day. If she got sued, it would have been public record. It would have ruined her chances of marrying well. Mark's family, they are old money. They check these things. I stared at my sister, the golden child, the success story, while I was budgeting for my rent and driving a used car. She was drowning in $70,000 of debt to keep up appearances, and my father was cannibalizing his own mother's savings to bail her out. "So you stole from Grandma to pay off Visa?" I asked. "I didn't steal," Gordon insisted. "I borrowed. I intended to put it back once the market turned around. I just needed to stop the bleeding before Mark found out she was insolvent." "And you, Elaine?" Mara asked, turning to my mother. "You facilitated the access. You are the one who secured the signature on the power of attorney." Elaine sniffed behind her sunglasses. "I was helping," she said, her voice trembling with self-pity. Gordon was so stressed. His blood pressure was through the roof. Sloane was crying every night. And Mother, well, Mother was in the hospital. She was confused. She didn't know what she needed. I thought if I could just handle the bills, I could take the burden off everyone. It was an act of love. "It was an act of deception," Mara corrected sharply. "You told her it was for medical billing. You used her vulnerability to hand her checkbook to your husband." "I did what a wife does," Elaine cried. "I supported my family." "You supported a crime," Eleanor said. It was the first time Eleanor had spoken since we sat down. Her voice was quiet, but it stopped Elaine cold. "You came to my bedside," Eleanor said, looking at her daughter. I was hooked up to an IV. I was frightened. And you looked me in the eye and lied to me so you could buy your husband a way out of his failures. Gordon slammed his hand on the table. I am not a failure. I have provided for this family for 40 years. I put food on the table. I put a roof over your heads. Did you? Mara asked. She reached into her file and pulled out a document. It was old. The paper yellowed and soft at the edges. Let us talk about provision, Mara said. Mr. Grant, you have repeatedly mentioned the wedding fund you promised to Olivia. You used it as a leverage tool for years. You recently told her you gave that fund to Sloane because Olivia didn't deserve it. It is my money, Gordon grunted. I can do what I want with it. Actually, Mara said, sliding the document across the table toward me. It is not your money. It never was. I looked down at the paper. It was a trust deed, dated 1994, the Eleanor Price Grandchildren Trust. Your grandmother established this trust when you were 2 years old. Mara explained to me. She deposited $50,000, money from your grandfather's life insurance. The terms were specific. The principal was to be invested and used for the education, advancement, or marriage of her grandchildren. Gordon was named as the trustee. He was the manager. He was supposed to grow the money. I felt the room tilt. The $50,000, I whispered. The money Dad always held over my head, that was Grandma's money? Yes, Mara said. Gordon didn't save a dime for you. Olivia, he just sat on the money his mother gave you, took the credit for it, and threatened to take it away if you didn't behave. And when Sloane got into debt, he liquidated your trust to pay her bills. I looked at my father. I saw him clearly for the first time. There was no successful businessman there. There was just a middleman who had spent his life taking credit for other people's labor and other people's generosity. You gave my money to Sloane, I said, my voice shaking with a cold rage. You told me I wasn't worthy of a real wedding paid for by money that was legally mine. Sloane needed it, Gordon shouted. Desperate now. She is the one with the potential. She is the one who could marry into the Sterling family. You were going to marry an accountant and live in a rental. You didn't need the capital. Sloane was an investment. I am not a stock, Sloane screamed. Stop calling me an investment. You are a bad investment, Evan said. He spoke from the end of the table. He hadn't touched his water. He had been typing on his laptop, silent and lethal. Speaking of bad investments, Evan said, turning the laptop around, we need to address the final discrepancy, the big one. We admitted to the credit cards, Sloane said quickly, wiping her eyes. We admitted to the wedding planner kickbacks. What else do you want? There is a withdrawal from 3 weeks ago, Evan said. $80,000. It was labeled in the ledger as Venue Expansion Deposit, Larkspur Ridge. Gordon nodded vigorously. Yes, we wanted to upgrade the ballroom. We had to pay up front. That is interesting, Evan said. Because I called Larkspur Ridge this morning. They never received an upgrade payment. In fact, they haven't received anything since the initial deposit, which you put on Eleanor's credit card, and we canceled. There must be a wire delay, Gordon stammered. There is no delay, Evan said, because the money didn't go to Larkspur Ridge. It went to a company called Horizon Title and Escrow. The color drained from Sloane's face so fast she looked like a corpse. Evan tapped a key. A document appeared on the screen. This is a closing disclosure for a property at 405 Riverview Drive, Evan read. It is a 2-bedroom luxury condo in the Pearl District. The buyer is listed as Mark Sterling. The down payment of $80,000 was provided by look here, GG Holdings, LLC. Evan looked up. His eyes were hard. You didn't just pay for a wedding, Evan said. You stole your mother's life savings to buy a condo for your daughter's boyfriend. It was a wedding gift, Sloane shrieked. Mark said we needed an asset. He said rent is throwing money away. We needed a home to start our lives. So you bought it with my money? Eleanor asked. You are old, Sloane yelled. Standing up. You are going to die soon. You don't need it. Why are you so selfish? Mark and I have our whole lives ahead of us. We need a start. You are just sitting on that money, rotting away in that cottage." The cruelty of the words hung in the air, vibrating. "Sloan!" Elaine gasped, horrified. But Sloan was past caring. The mask was gone. The entitlement was a raw, gaping wound. "It is true," Sloan cried. "Why should Olivia get it? She's boring. She never does anything special. I am the one who is going to be someone. I deserve that apartment." I looked at Evan. He didn't look angry. He looked vindicated. He had been right from the very first moment at the dinner table. This wasn't about a party. It was about an extraction. They were stripping Eleanor for parts to build Sloan a life she hadn't earned. Eleanor stood up. She moved slowly, leaning her hands on the table. She looked at Sloan, the granddaughter whose picture hung in the center of the hallway, the golden girl who could do no wrong. "I am old," Eleanor said. Her voice was steady. "And I will die soon. That is true." She looked at Gordon. "But I am not dead yet," she said. "And I am certainly not an ATM." She turned to Sloan. "You talk about a real wedding," Eleanor said. "You talk about what you deserve. But I see now, the wedding was never the point, was it? The wedding was just the costume you wore so you could rob me." "Grandma, please," Sloan sobbed, realizing she had gone too far. "I didn't mean it. I am just stressed." "The apartment," Evan interjected, looking at Gordon. "Is the deed in Sloan's name?" Gordon looked down at his hands. "No, Mark insisted for tax purposes it had to be in his name." I laughed. I couldn't help it. It was a dark, bitter laugh. "You idiot," I said to my father. "You stole $80,000 from your mother to buy an apartment for a man who isn't even married to your daughter yet? If he breaks up with her tomorrow, he keeps the condo and she gets nothing." Gordon looked up, his eyes wide with a sudden, dawning horror. He hadn't thought of that. He had been so desperate to please the Sterlings, to buy his way into their circle, that he had handed them the cash without securing the asset. "I have a verbal agreement with Mark's father," Gordon whispered. "Verbal agreements do not hold up in court, Gordon," Mara said, closing her file. "Especially not when the funds used to purchase the property were obtained through fraud." She stood up. "Here is what is going to happen," Mara said. "We are going to file a lien on that property immediately. We are going to notify the title company that the down payment was stolen funds. Mark Sterling will be forced to either return the $80,000 or forfeit the property." "He will leave me," Sloan wailed. "If you take the apartment, he will call off the wedding. He will leave me." "If he leaves you because you can't buy him a condo," Eleanor said, looking at her granddaughter with pity, "then he was never yours to begin with, child." Sloan collapsed into her chair, burying her face in her arms, sobbing uncontrollably. I sat there, feeling a strange sensation wash over me. It wasn't happiness. It wasn't triumph. It was clarity. For years, I had thought I was the problem. I thought I wasn't good enough, shiny enough, successful enough. I thought my father withheld the wedding fund because I hadn't earned it. But I wasn't the problem. I was never the problem. The problem was that I was the only one in the family who was real, and to a family of counterfeits, reality feels like a threat. "This meeting is concluded," Mara said. "Gordon, Elaine, you have 6 weeks to liquidate whatever assets you have left. Your cars, your country club memberships, I do not care. To repay the remaining balance of the $130,000 owed to the trust and to Eleanor directly. If you miss a payment by a single day, I file the criminal charges." She turned to Eleanor. "And Mrs. Price," Mara said gently, "we have the new will drafted. It removes Gordon and Sloan as beneficiaries completely and places your estate into a protected trust managed by an independent fiduciary, with Olivia as the sole beneficiary." "Do it," Eleanor said. Gordon looked up. "Mother, you can't. You can't cut us out. We are your family." Eleanor picked up her purse. She walked to the door. She stopped and looked back at the son she had raised, the son who had sold her out for a country club membership and a lie. "You already cut yourselves out, Gordon," Eleanor said. "You cut yourselves out the moment you decided my signature was worth more to you than my life." She opened the door. "Come along, Olivia, Evan. Let us go get some lunch. I believe I can afford a very nice meal now that I'm not buying an apartment for a stranger." We walked out. We left them in the conference room, the crying daughter, the broken father, the delusional mother. We left them to the silence of their own making. The mediation took place in a sterile, beige conference room in Ridgewater City, a neutral ground chosen specifically because it was 30 miles away from the social circles my parents desperately tried to impress. There were no gavels. There were no judges in black robes. There was just a long table made of synthetic wood and a stack of papers that weighed more than my conscience. This was not a movie scene where the villain is dragged away in handcuffs while the hero cheers. This was the messy, quiet reality of American justice. It was the sound of a pen scratching against paper, dismantling a lifetime of lies one signature at a time. Gordon sat across from me. In the harsh fluorescent light, he looked older. The bluster was gone. The provider persona he had worn like a suit of armor had been stripped away, leaving behind a man who was terrified of his own bank balance. Beside him, Elaine was silent, her hands twisting a tissue into a tight white rope. Sloane wasn't even looking at us. She was staring at her phone, her thumb hovering over a screen that I suspected was no longer lighting up with messages from Mark. Mara Whitfield slid the final settlement agreement across the table. "This is the binding resolution," Mara said, her voice devoid of triumph. "It outlines the repayment schedule for the $212,000 misappropriated from the Eleanor Price estate and the Eleanor Price Grandchildren Trust. It includes the liquidation of the Grant family vacation cabin, the sale of the secondary vehicle, and a garnishment of Gordon Grant's pension until the debt is satisfied." Gordon picked up the pen. His hand shook. "I need to ask," Gordon said, his voice a dry rasp. "Is the cabin really necessary? It has been in the family for 20 years. "The money was in the family for longer," Evan said. He didn't look up from his laptop. "You spent the cash. Now you sell the wood. That is how debt works." Gordon looked at me, his eyes pleading for a mercy he had never shown me. He wanted me to be the good daughter one last time. He wanted me to say it was okay, that we could work something out, that he didn't have to lose his status symbols. I looked at him. I remembered the dinner at the Oarsman. I remembered him sliding my wedding fund to Sloane without a second thought. I remembered him telling me I didn't deserve a real wedding. "Sign it, Dad," I said softly. He signed. Next came the restrictions. Mara laid out the restraining order on the finances. "Effective immediately," Mara said. "Gordon and Elaine Grant are removed from all access to Eleanor Price's accounts. You are forbidden from contacting her financial institutions. You are forbidden from soliciting funds from her. Any attempt to circumvent this will result in the immediate filing of the criminal charges we are holding in abeyance." Elaine finally spoke up. "We just want to keep this private," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Please, we have a reputation in Kendall Harbor. If people find out we are selling the cabin, if they find out about the audit, can we just agree to keep this within the family? For dignity's sake?" Eleanor, who had been sitting quietly next to me, turned her head. She looked at the daughter she had raised. "Dignity," Eleanor said, testing the word like it was a piece of fruit that had gone bad. "You want to talk about dignity? Elaine, you drugged me with compliments while you stole my security. You let me believe I was going senile so you could buy flowers for a party." Eleanor leaned forward. "The time to worry about saving face was before you signed my name to a check," she said. "The story is already out. You cannot put the smoke back in the chimney." Then there was Sloane. The consequences for my sister were not legal, but they were perhaps more devastating to her. The wedding was dead. It hadn't just been postponed. It had collapsed under the weight of its own fraudulent foundation. "The venue has canceled the contract due to non-payment of the second installment," Mara noted, checking a list. The $80,000 for the condo has been reclaimed by the title company and returned to the trust. I understand Mr. Sterling has reconsidered his position? Sloane let out a sound that was half sob, half laugh. He blocked me, Sloane said. She looked up. Her eyes rimmed with red, her makeup smeared. Mark blocked me on everything. His father told him to cut ties. They said I was a liability. They said our family was messy. She looked at Gordon with pure venom. You said you had it handled, Sloane hissed. You said the money was there. You let me believe I was safe. And now I have nothing. No fiancé, no apartment, no wedding. I am 26 years old and I am a joke. You are free, I said to her. Sloane blinked at me. What? You are free, I repeated. You don't have to pretend anymore. Sloane, you don't have to marry a guy who needs his daddy to launder money for him. You don't have to impress people who only like you when you are buying the drinks. It is over. You can actually just be a person now. She didn't understand. She couldn't. She just put her head down on the table and wept for the loss of her golden cage. The final twist came from Eleanor. Before we left the room, Mara produced one last document. It wasn't for Gordon or Sloane to sign. It was for Eleanor. This is the new trust structure, Mara explained. It places all remaining assets, the house, the recovered funds, the savings, into an irrevocable living trust. It is managed by a third-party fiduciary. Even if Eleanor wanted to give you money tomorrow, she couldn't. She has removed her own ability to be manipulated. Gordon looked shocked. Mother, you are locking up your own money? You are paying a stranger to manage it? I am paying for peace of mind, Eleanor said, signing the document with a flourish. I am making sure that no one ever looks at me again and sees a payday. I am making sure that when you come to visit me, Gordon, you are coming to see your mother, not your banker. And if you don't come, well, then I will know exactly where I stand. It wasn't done out of spite. It was done out of safety. She was building a wall so that she could finally open the door without fear. We walked out of that building into the bright, harsh sunlight of the afternoon. The air tasted different. It tasted clean. A month later, the money hit my account. $50,000 plus interest, the wedding fund, my inheritance. It was a staggering amount of money. For a moment, looking at the balance on my phone screen, I felt a petty urge to burn it. I wanted to book the biggest venue in Oregon. I wanted to buy a dress that cost more than Sloane's car. I wanted to throw a party so loud it would shatter the windows of my parents' house. But then I looked at Evan, who was sitting on our second-hand couch, reading a book. I looked at the life we had built without their help. I didn't need to prove anything. The need to show off is a symptom of insecurity. And I was done being insecure. I didn't book a ballroom. I used $30,000 to pay off the last of my student loans. I watched the balance hit zero and felt a weight lift off my shoulders that I hadn't realized I was carrying. I put $10,000 into a high-yield savings account, a real emergency fund, so that if I ever got sick, I would never have to sign a paper I couldn't read. And the rest? I donated it to the Legal Aid Society of Oregon, specifically earmarking it for a program that provides legal defense for the elderly against financial abuse. As for the wedding, we got married in June, the same month Sloane had booked. But we didn't go to Larkspur Ridge. We got married in Eleanor's backyard. The grass was freshly cut, smelling of summer and green earth. The hydrangeas were in full bloom, giant blue heads nodding in the breeze. We rented a white tent, just in case of rain, and hired a local taco truck that made the best carnitas in the county. There were 40 people there, my friends from the nonprofit, Evan's colleagues from the firm, neighbors who had known me since I was a child. I wore a simple white dress I bought off the rack for $300, but on my head, I wore the veil, the Chantilly lace from 1942. It was yellowed with age, fragile and heavy with history. And when Eleanor saw me put it on in her bedroom, she cried tears that were purely happy. "You look like yourself," she told me. "You look real." My parents came. They sat in the back row. They were quiet. Gordon didn't make a speech. He didn't try to take over the microphone. He sat there in his suit, watching Evan spin me around on the makeshift dance floor. And for the first time, I saw him look at me not as an extension of himself, not as a disappointment, but as a woman who was entirely out of his reach. He saw that I was happy. He saw that I was safe. And he saw that he had absolutely no credit for any of it. Sloane didn't come. She sent a card. It was generic, unsigned, but it was a start. She was working as a receptionist at a dental office in the next town over, trying to pay off her own credit cards. It was a long road, but it was her road. At the end of the night, as the string lights twinkled above us and the fireflies began to dance in the hedges, I sat on the porch swing with Evan. Eleanor was inside, sleeping in her favorite chair. The air was cool and sweet. "Do you regret it?" Evan asked me, handing me a slice of cake. "Not having the big show?" I looked at the garden. I looked at the people who were still laughing by the taco truck. I looked at the ring on my finger. Simple. Gold. Paid for with money earned from honest work. "No," I said. "The show is for people who need an audience. I have everything I need right here." I learned something that year. I learned that family is not a biological mandate to accept abuse. I learned that silence is not peace. It is just a container for pain. And I learned that sometimes, the most loving thing you can do for your family is to stop letting them destroy themselves with your money. We didn't get revenge. Revenge is bitter, and it keeps you tied to the people you hate. We got justice. And justice? Justice is freedom. So, I have to ask you, have you ever had to protect the person you love from the very family that is supposed to shelter them? Because if there is one thing I know now, it is that blood might be thicker than water, but it shouldn't be used to drown you. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to hear where you are tuning in from today. Are you listening while driving to work, cooking dinner, or maybe taking a walk? Please let me know in the comments below so we can connect. And don't forget to subscribe to Leona Revenge Stories. Like the video. And hit that hype button so we can share this truth with more people who might need to hear it.